Okay, so let's take earnings per share. So when we say earnings per share, dalawa yan. One is the basic earnings per share and the diluted earnings per share. Okay? So the basic earnings per share, the formula would be net income minus preferred dividends. The net income will always be an after-tax item. Okay? Minus the preferred dividends. This preferred dividends class, depende kasi ng classification ng preference shares. If the preference shares are cumulative, you will deduct 1-year dividend regardless of declaration. May declaration o walang declaration, deduct a 1-year dividend. But for non-cumulative na preference shares, you will deduct 1-year dividend if there is a declaration of dividend. Okay? While redeemable preference shares, wala lang tayong gagawin dyan. Smiley lang yan. As we all know, redeemable preference shares are not equity securities but debt securities. Okay, divided by the number of the weighted average number of shout. In some books, tinatawag yan na WANOS, di ba? Weighted average number of shares outstanding. Again, your number of shares outstanding includes your issued shares, subscribe, and treasury shares. Okay. Kapag naman sa diluted earnings per share, masasabi mo kasing diluted yan if the resulting figure is lower than the basic earnings per share. Kaya nga sabi na dilute. Okay? Pag nabababa niya ang basic earnings per share, that's the time na yan ay tinatawag na diluted earnings per share. And the formula for the diluted earnings per share would be net income, and this is also an after-tax item, plus interest expense. This interest expense should come from convertible bonds. Okay? Diyan lang magagaling yan. Okay? Hindi sa kahit anong panggagalingan ng interest expense. Loans, for example, meron niyang interest expense, pero hindi yun. That should come from the convertible bonds, and that should be an after-tax item. Okay? So net income after tax plus interest expense, which is an after-tax item coming from convertible bonds, divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding plus incremental shares coming from the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. Again, the denominator would be weighted average number of shares outstanding plus incremental shares coming from the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. These potentially dilutive securities, these are the securities that can be converted into ordinary shares. Okay. So again, the formula for the diluted earnings per share, that should be net income after tax plus interest expense coming from the convertible bonds, and that should also be an after-tax item divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding plus incremental shares coming from the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. Okay, now, what type of EPS should be presented in the financial statements? Okay, so let's say these are the values. We have here the basic earnings per share and the diluted earnings per share. So sabi natin, that is considered as a diluted earnings per share if napababa niya ang basic earnings per share, just like this. So if the BEPS is 5 and the resulting figure using the formula of the diluted earnings per share is 4, so this is actually diluted. And the BEPS now and the DEPS should be presented in the financial statements. Okay. However, if the BEPS is 5, while the resulting computation using the formula of DEPS resulted to 6, which is higher than the BEPS, this is what you call anti-dilutive. And the anti-dilutive figure should not be presented in the financial statements. What if the resulting figure, sir, is 5, and the resulting figure using the formula of the diluted earnings per share resulted also to 5? which is equal to the BEPS. As a matter of practice, kasi sa theory wala yan eh. Ang sinasabi lang ng theory, pag napababa niya. Okay, pero as a matter of practice class, kapag ganyan ang nagiging resulta, that should also be presented in the financial statements, meaning the BEPS and the DEPS are also presented in the financial statements. Okay, so let's have some exercises here. So here, the requirement is to compute for the basic earnings per share. Okay, using the independent assumptions. Okay. Okay. So here, ang sabi niya, meron daw siyang 200,000 20 par ordinary shares and 20,050 par 10% preference shares issued and outstanding. The net income was 2 million pesos and no dividends was declared. Okay. Magkano ang basic earnings per share? So, yan. Okay. So, what is the basic earnings per share? Again, this is the formula. Okay, net income given, the net income is 2 million pesos. What if naglagay sir net income for the year 2 million pesos? Tapos nag-period siya, tapos sinabi tax rate is 30% for example. Would we assume that this is a before tax item or an after tax item? If the problem in the diluted earnings per share provide you a net income, okay, without any description of such, that is considered to be an after-tax item. The income tax rate is intended for the computation of the diluted earnings per share. Okay? Unless otherwise na sinabi niya na net income before tax ito. That's the time na i-after tax mo pa. Okay? So here, wala namang tax rate na binigay. So this is assumed to be an after-tax items. So this is your net income, okay, minus preferred dividends. Meron bang preference shares? Meron. And what is the classification of the preference shares? This is non-cumulative. Ang sabi natin dito, once that is non-cumulative, you will only deduct a 1-year dividend if there is a declaration of dividends. At sabi dito, no dividends was declared. Okay? Since this is non-cumulative, wala kang ibabawas na 1-year dividend. Okay? So that would now be your numerator divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding. And the weighted average number of shares outstanding here, given naman siya issued and outstanding, hindi naman siya gumalaw eh. Okay? So this is your ordinary shares with 200,000 ordinary shares outstanding. So this is now 2 million divided by 200,000. This is your basic earnings per share. Okay? What about in item 2? Sabi niya, preference shares are cumulative. Using the matrix, using the concept map, it says that if that is cumulative, you will deduct 1-year dividend regardless of declaration. Despite that no dividends was declared, okay? So you will deduct 1-year dividend. Okay? So here, this is 2 million. That is the net income after tax minus the preferred dividends. And the preferred dividends here is 2 million or 20,000 times 50 times 10%. So this is now 100,000. Okay? What if, sir, ang nangyari ay 20x1, 20x2, 20x3. Okay. Halimbawa, sir, in 20x1, walang declaration ng dividends. No declaration of dividends. No declaration of dividends. At dito, may declaration ng dividends. And the subject preference shares is classified as a cumulative preference shares. Would we deduct the 3-year period here? Hindi. Ang sabi natin, laging 1 year yan. Okay? Kasi, during the times na walang declaration, nagde-deduct ka na ng 1-year dividend. Just like here. So, sampulan natin, just like here, let's say ng 20x1, walang declaration ng dividends. Pero since that is cumulative, nagbawas ka ng preferred dividends yield equivalent to 1 year. So, ibig sabihin, nagbawas ka dito ng 100,000. This is hypothetical figures class, yung x1, x2, x3. Okay? Ayan. So, pagdating dito, wala rin declaration ng dividend. Since that is cumulative, nagdeduct ka din ng 100,000. Okay? So, dito, pagdating niya na may declaration ng dividends that pay all the dividends in arrears, huwag mong i-attempt na mag-deduct ng 300,000. 100,000 pa din. Kasi for those times na walang declaration ng dividends, nagbabawas ka na ng 100,000. If that is cumulative. Okay? So here, since this is cumulative, so regardless of declaration, magbawas ka ng 1-year dividend. So this is 2 million minus 100,000. This is 1.9. And the weighted average number of shares outstanding means at 200,000. Hindi naman siya gumalaw. So this would now be 1.9 divided by 200,000. This is now 9.5. The basic earnings per share is 9.5. Okay, so that is item 2. What if the preference shares are non-cumulative and participating? Okay, ganun pa rin yan. Parang sa basic earnings per share ninyo, may participation. Okay, pag may participation, dapat may excess. Okay. Kung nasa book value per share ka, ang pinaghahatian doon is the total stockholders equity. Ngayon, ang pinaghahatian, since this is earnings per share, earnings. Okay, so ito yon. This is item 3. In item 3, the net income reported is 2 million. Then provide a 1-year dividend to preference. Okay, so this is just 20,000 times 50 times 10. Okay. Now, to get the excess, you must compute also the dividend for the ordinary. And the ordinary again would have a 1-year dividend equal to the dividend rate of the preference shares. Parang yung ginawa natin sa book value per share. Okay? So this would always be a 1-year dividend using the dividend rate on the preference shares for the participating preference shares. Okay, so this is just 200,000 here times 20 times the dividend rate of the preference shares, which is 10%. So yan yun. So this is 2 million. This is the net income after tax minus this amount, 100,000 and 400,000 for the ordinary. This is the excess. And the excess would always be allocated based on the aggregate par value. And the aggregate par value here, we have the ordinary shares of 200,000 times 20 and the preference shares of 20,000 times 50. So this is 5 million pesos. Okay? If you don't want to get the allocation factor, gamitin mo na lang yung fraction. Diba? That is 1.5 million. This is preference, that is 1/5 because the aggregate par is 5 million. So 1/5, so that is 300,000. Okay? And 4/5 of 1.5 is 1.2. Okay, 1.5 times 4/5, this is 1.2. Okay? So this is now 100,000 plus 300,000. This is 400,000. Okay? Divided by the number of the weighted average number of shares outstanding for preference. Okay? So this is 20,000 shares. So this is now the earnings per share, basic earnings per share for preference shares. So here, we have 400,000 here, 1.2, the allocated amount. So the total ordinary stockholders' equity is 1.6 divided by the number of the weighted average number of shares outstanding, which is 200,000. Basic earnings per share for ordinary shares. Okay. Let's go to problem 2. So, sa problem 2, Ang kailangan kasi natin dyan is the weighted average number of shares outstanding. So to get the weighted average number of shares outstanding, kailangan natin ng 1, let's say for example, this is 20,000. Okay? Then, sige, 20,000. Dan mo lang, 20,000. Okay. Tapos nag-reacquire. O, di may, nag-issue pala ng March 31. 200,000 is the beginning. Nag-issue ng 20,000. Okay. Then, pagdating ng June 30, nag-reacquire. So, this is treasury. Minus 40. Then, nag-implement ng 3-for-1 share split. So, this would be times 3. Times 3. Times 3. Times 3. Okay? Then, nag-reissue October 31. Nag-implement ng share split. October 1. Dito pala. October 31 pala nag-share split. October 1, nag-reissue pa ng 20,000. Ulitin natin. 200,000 beginning. March 31, nag-issue ng 20,000 additional shares. June 30, nag-reacquire treasury shares. October 1, nag-reissue. Okay? Then, come this October 31, nagkaroon ng split. 3:1. 3-for-1. So, this is also 3. Okay? Pagdating ng December 1, nag-reissue ng remaining previously reacquired shares. Dito kasi nanggaling yun yung reacquired shares, 40 yan. Okay? Times 3, 120 na yan. Okay? 120, 140 times 3 is 120 na. Okay? Kaya here, ang sabi niya, reissue the remaining previously acquired shares. Ilan na lang ang natira? Ano ibig sabihin? Coming from this 40, ano na yan this is 40 times 3. Yan yung treasury mo Okay. This is na 120. Ito, nag-reissue siya Okay, ng 20,000 previously reacquired shares. So this is 60. So this is 20 times 3. 60. So naiiwan na lang dyan class. Ilan? Di 60,000 na lang din. Okay? So ito yung reissue. Okay? Yan. Ito yung reissue, the remaining previously reacquired shares. So this is 60,000. Okay? Ano yung 60,000 na yun? Yung naiwan. So this 60 came from this 120, the treasury. Nag-reissue kasi ng 20. However, nag-split. Kaya 60 rin yan. And the remaining is 60. Ito yun. Reissue the remaining previously reacquired shares. Okay? So, this is now outstanding for 12 months over 12. Kasi ang kailangan natin, di ba? The weighted. This is outstanding for how many months? 9 over 12. This is outstanding for how many months? 6 over 12. This is outstanding for how many months? 3 over 12. And this is outstanding for how many months? 1 over 12. Okay? So this is 20,000 times 3 times 12 over 12. This is now the weighted average. Okay? This is 20,000 times 3 times 9 over 12. This is 45. And this is negative 40,000 times 3 times 6 over 12. So this is 60,000. And this is 20,000 times 3 times 3 over 12. So this is 15,000. And this is outstanding for 60,000. Outstanding for 1 over 12. So this is, yan. Okay, 5,000. So this is now the weighted average number of shares outstanding. 600 plus 45 minus 60 plus 45 plus 5. And the answer here is 605,000 weighted average number of shares outstanding. And that is your problem 2. But how about problem 3? Problem 3, the requirement also is to compute for the weighted average number of shares outstanding. These are the effects, no? Yung 200,000 nandito yan. Nag-issue 30,000 dito yan. Nag-split kung sino yung inabutan times 2 yon. Nag-reacquire treasury yan. Nag-distribute ng stock dividends, lahat yan, times 1.1 times 1.1 times 1.1. Tapos nag-split ulit ng 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. Okay, try natin. With this problem 3, can you please try computing in the next 1 minute, no? What is the weighted average number of shares that should be used in calculating the earnings per share? 200,000. Then, issued 30,000, April 1. Okay. Then, October 1, reacquired. So, this is minus 20. Then, teka. O, sige. Ito, 200,000. Tapos, April, nag-issue ng 30,000. Okay, tapos nagkaroon ng split na 2 for 1. So, mag-split muna to. So, this is times 2 times 2. Tapos, October 1, nag-reacquire ng 20,000. Okay? Then, nag-distribute ng dividends, 10%. So, this would be 1.1. Okay, 1.1. 1.1. And, December 1, nag-split sa 3. So, this is 3. This is 3. This is 3. Okay. So, this is outstanding for how many months? January, 12 over 12. This is outstanding for 9 over 12, April 1. And this is outstanding from October, November, December, 3 over 12. Okay. And this is now 200,000 times 2 times 1.1 times 3 times 12 over 12. Okay. So, this is 30,000 times 2 times 1.1 times 3 times 9 over 12. And this is outstanding for 20,000 times 1.1 times 3 and outstanding for 3 months over 12. Okay, so this is now 16,500. So this is now the weighted average number of shares outstanding. So here, problem 4 is once we have the stock rights options. Okay, so here is the stock rights, no? Ang gagamit kasi tayo ng theoretical parity value. Okay? Ng stock rights. Kapag ang stock rights are issued at rights on, the theoretical value formula would be ito yun. So, fair value of rights at rights on minus the subscription price or the exercise price divided by the number of shares to purchase 1 share plus 1. Ayan, kaya shares plus 1. Kapag naman fair value, kapag naman ang binigay ay X rights, so this is fair value of rights at a fair value of shares at X rights minus the exercise price or the subscription price divided by the number of shares to purchase 1 share. Wala siyang plus 1. So in this problem 4, it says here na, sabi niyo, profit attributable to ordinary is 1.9, 2.1, and 3 million. Okay, the requirement here is just for 2022. Hanggang 2022 lang. Okay, so here, the number of shares before the right is issued. So before the right is issued, meaning that is rights on. Kasi pag after the rights has been issued, that is already X rights. And this is the right issue, 1 share for each 5 shares outstanding. So the number of rights to purchase one share is 5. Okay? Then the exercise price is 5, and the date of right issue, January 1, and the last day to exercise is March 31. Then the market price of one share immediately before kasi ito before the exercise. So that is at rights on. And you are required to compute the basic earnings per share. Okay. So the starting point here is to determine the adjustment factor. Ginagawa lang naman to kapag merong mga stock rights. Step number 1 would be the computation of the theoretical parity value per right. Okay, paano yun? Fair value of shares. Okay, at rights on. This is at rights on. Minus the exercise price divided by the number of shares to purchase one share, which is 5 plus 1. So this would be 12 minus 5. This is 7 divided by 6. This is now the theoretical parity value formula, or the theoretical value per right. Okay. Then the fair value of rights at rights on is 12 minus the theoretical value per right of 1.17, which has been derived. Then this is now the fair value of the shares at X rights. So this would now be the adjustment factor. Okay, the adjustment factor would be 12 divided by 10.83. This is 1.1. Okay, and that 1.1 is used to compute for the weighted average number of shares outstanding. So here, you have 150,000 shares, no? In 2021 times the adjustment factor of 1.1, that would now be your denominator. Your net income in 2021 is 1.9 million divided by 166,500. So this is 11.41. Okay? While for 2022, since na-exercise na yung rights. Okay? So we will get the weighted average number of shares outstanding, but be sure to consider the allocation factor on the beginning shares, which is 150 prior to the exercise of the stock right. So this is 1.1, 166,500. Okay? And this is 3 outstanding for 3 months over 12 because at this point, nagkaroon na ng exercise ng stock rights ng March 31. So the number of shares outstanding then would be 180,000 times 9 over 12. So this is now your weighted average number of shares outstanding. Okay? So the given income here is 2.1 million pesos divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding, which is 176,625. The basic earnings per share would be 11.89. Okay? Ito for 2023 ito. Okay, this is for 2023. And for 2023, net income is 3.6. And the number of shares, 180 na kasi siya eh. Hindi naman nagbago yan ng 2023. Kaya this is 20. Okay? So, ang common na tinatanong dito class is 2021 and 2022. Kaya, doon ka mag-focus. No? Okay. So, this is problem 4. Next, we have problem 5 here. Okay. Dito sa problem 5 class, this is not a diluted earnings per share. Again, diluted earnings per share will be considered nga. We can say that an EPS is diluted once napababa niya ang basic earnings per share. Kaya pag tinanong ka class, determine the diluted earnings per share, your step number 1 will always be the computation of the basic earnings per share. Laging ganon. Kasi you cannot say that that is a diluted earnings per share unless otherwise that you have known the basic earnings per share. because that is diluted when na-dilute niya, napababaw niya yung basic earnings per share. Maraming nagkakamali dyan. Because in some problems, diretso ang tanong, compute for the diluted earnings per share. Laging ganon. Pero ang pinaka-konsepto nun, gusto niya malaman kung magko-compute ka ba ng basic earnings per share mo. Baka kasi ang lumabas, anti-dilutive. Okay? So here, so ang sabi niya dito, the net income is 2.5. We have now the convertible bonds. Okay? At ang sabi natin, the formula for the diluted earnings per share should be the net income after tax plus the interest expense coming from the convertible bonds. And that should also be an after-tax item. Lagyan natin dito. Okay. So ito, diluted earnings per share at the net income plus interest expense coming from the convertible bonds, and this should be an after-tax item divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding plus incremental shares coming from the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities or securities that can be converted into ordinary shares. Okay. So here, so we have convertible bonds and the ordinary shares throughout the year is 150,000 and the tax rate is 25%. And it says here that each 1,000 bond is convertible into 50 ordinary shares. So that is what you call potentially dilutive securities. A security that can be converted into ordinary shares. Okay? And it says here to compute for the basic and diluted, basic and diluted earnings per share of the entity given the following independent assumptions. Okay. Sabi niya, none of the bonds were converted. Okay? So, starting point is to compute first for the basic earnings per share. And that is net income minus preferred dividends divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding. Okay? The net income is provided. This is 2.5 million pesos. However, there is no preference shares. So, kung walang preference shares, edi wala kang preferred dividends divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding, which is 150,000 all throughout the year. So this is times 12 over 12, standing for 12 months over 12. Okay, let's now go to the computation of the EPS. Okay. So the computation of the EPS, and you have your formula here. So this is your net income. The net income is 2.5 million pesos. Okay? Plus interest expense coming from the convertible bonds. Meron bang convertible bonds? Meron. So none of the bonds were converted. Okay? So meaning these bonds, okay, is existing until 2023. So this is just 1 million times 12% times the 75% to exclude the effect of the tax rate. So that is 90,000. Again, this is 1 million times 12% times 0.75. And again, we are under the scenario 1. Okay? So here, your numerator would be 2.9 plus 90,000. So that is 2,590,000. How about your denominator? Your denominator would be 150,000. Okay? This is the weighted average number of shares outstanding. Remember that the formula is plus incremental shares coming from the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. The formula for the diluted EPS is just an assumption. assumption that the shares were converted or exercised. And this is assumed when the time that the potentially dilutive securities were issued. Okay? So just like here, each 1,000 bond is convertible into 50 ordinary shares. It is assumed then that this conversion this conversion was assumed happened when the time that these convertible bonds were issued. Okay? And that is when January. So that is the time, okay, that it is assumed that these potentially derivative securities were converted into 50 ordinary shares. Kaya ito yun. So that is each 1,000 bonds, so 1 million divided by 1,000. So that is 1,000 also times 50. So this is now the incremental shares coming from the assumed conversion. So this is now 150,000 plus 50,000. So this is 200,000 shares. Weighted average number of shares. Because this is also January 1. Diba? So January 1 times 12 over 12. Yan yun. So 200,000. So your diluted earnings per share is 12.95. And this is actually diluted because the basic earnings per share is 16.67 while the computation using the diluted formula is 12.95. That is actually diluted because it lowers the basic earnings per share. Okay, let's go to scenario 2. In scenario 2, the bonds were converted. This time, there is an actual conversion. Okay? So, basic earnings per share, net income minus preferred dividends divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding. Okay? So, wala naman yung preference shares eh. Kaya walang preferred dividends. So, this is the net income. 2.5 million minus 0. So, this is 2.5. Okay? Divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding. Remember, this 150,000, yan siya ng January. Nga lang, nagkaroon kasi ng actual conversion. And the actual conversion happened when June 30. So, kunin mo yung weighted niyan. So, ang weighted niyan would be 1,000 times 50, di ba? 1 million divided by 1,000, that is 1,000 times 50. And that is outstanding for how many months? From June to December, so that is 6 over 12. Kasi weighted eh. Okay? So, nangyayari niya class, ang weighted average number of shares mo dito, 175. Saan ang galing ulit? This is your January, 150,000. Outstanding for 12 months over 12, kaya 150 yan. Ito naman, yung June 30 mo, yung June 30, nagkaroon ng actual conversion eh. Okay, the actual conversion happened June 30, and that is each 1,000 bond is convertible into 50 ordinary shares. So that would be 1 million divided by 1,000. So that is also 1,000 bond times 50. So that is now 50,000. However, weighted kasi. This is outstanding for how many months? From June to December. So that is 6 over 12. Kaya naging 25 lang. So that is 1,000 times 50 times 6 over 12. So this is now 175,000. This is your denominator in getting the basic earnings per share. So that is 2.5 million divided by 175,000. So this is 14.29. Okay. So that is the basic earnings per share. Okay. Let's go to DEPS. Remember that the formula is only the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. Your net income is 2.5. Okay? There is a convertible bonds. And the convertible bonds, okay, only exist until June 30. So the interest would run only for 6 months from January to June. So this would now be 1 million times 12% times 6 over 12 times 75%. Okay? To exclude the 25% tax rate. After all, this is an after-tax item. So this would now be 1 million times 12% times 6 over 12 times 0.75. Okay? So this is now the interest expense coming from the convertible bonds. Okay? So this is now your answer, no? In the numerator. Okay, so this is uh 2545. Okay? Then how about your denominator? Your denominator class, listen, that this is only an assumed conversion. Okay? So the diluted earnings per share is not affected by the actual conversion because the formula says that this diluted earnings per share assumes the conversion. And the assumption of conversion or exercise is assumed to be exercised or converted when the time that the potentially dilutive securities were issued. Just like here, these convertible bonds were issued January 1. So this is when would be the assumed period when this 1,000 1 million bonds were converted into 50 ordinary shares, not the June 30. Because June 30 is the actual conversion. And the formula for the diluted earnings per share is just an assumption of conversion or exercise. So here, so the outstanding is 150. This is what? 50,000. Why? Because this was assumed to have been converted on January 1, 2023. So to compute for this 50,000, you have 1 million divided by 1,000 bonds. So that is 1,000 times 50. Since this was assumed to have been converted on January 1, 2023, then it is outstanding for 12 months over 12. Kaya 50,000 ito. Okay, so this is now 2,545 divided by 50, 20,000, 200,000, 150 plus 50,000. So this is 12.73. So that is your assumption 2. Well, for assumption 3, it says here that the issued bonds, that the bonds were issued, when October 1. Okay, this is October 1 yan. Okay? So, sige, let's try. Okay, so let's solve. So, the net income is still 2.5 million pesos. Okay? And there is no preferred dividends. Preference share, so there is no preferred dividends. Then, the bonds were issued October 1, 2023. Okay? So this is the time of issuance, but not the time of conversion. Okay? So wala lang effect yan. Kasi we're talking about number of shares here of 150,000 which is outstanding from January until 2023. Okay? But the bonds were just issued October 1. So there is no effect. Why? Because that would not increase the number of shares because it was not actually converted. So your denominator here would still be 150,000. Okay, so this would now be your basic earnings per share. Okay, but here class, we're talking about assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. Okay, we have a net income here of 2,500,000 pesos. And there is what? A convertible bonds. Okay, that would incur interest from October to December. So that is 1 million times 12%, no? Times 3 over 12 times 0.75 or 75% to exclude the effect of the 25% rate. Okay, so that is 1 million times 12% times 3 over 12 times 0.75 or 75%. And this is now the interest coming from the convertible bonds. So this would now be your numerator. So this is 2522. 2522, 500. Okay? Then, your denominator would be on January 1, 2023. You have an outstanding share of 150,000. But there was an issued potentially dilutive securities, which was when October 1, 2023. So this should be October 1, 2023. Yan. And ang formula is the assumed conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. Okay? And these bonds were then assumed to have been converted when the time it was issued. And this was issued when October 1. So the assumption date of conversion is on October 1. So to get the weighted, so that would be 1 million divided by 1,000 times 50 times the outstanding number of funds outstanding, which is 3 months over 12. Okay, so this is 1,000. 1,000 came from 1 million divided by 1,000 times 50 times 3 over 12. So that is 12,500. So this would now be your denominator. Okay? A total of 162,500. And this would now be your diluted earnings per share. Diluted in the sense that this is an amount that is lower than the basic earnings per share. Then let's go to problem 6. No? So here, basic and diluted earnings per share. No? So, walang convertible bonds naman dito. Ang nandito lang ay convertible preference shares. Okay? So, sabi dyan, Parkson Company had 200,000 ordinary shares outstanding on January 1. In addition, 100,000 10% 20 par convertible preference shares were also outstanding. No? Each preference share is convertible into 2 ordinary shares. Net income for the year was 1.8. Dividends on the preference shares were declared and paid. Okay, let's go to the requirement. To compute for the basic and diluted earnings per share, provided the following independent assumptions. Scenario number 1, none of the preference shares were converted throughout the year. Okay, we have the basic earnings per share. Okay, basic earnings per share here. Income. Okay, minus the preferred dividends, which is always be equal to a 1-year dividend. Okay, so it says here that there is a preference shares, convertible preference shares. Okay, so this is 100,000 times 10% times 20. So that is 200 ba to? 200,000. Oo. Pero sir, diba kanina meron tayong tinitingnan? Tinitingnan natin sir if that is cumulative, non-cumulative, ito yun. Non-cumulative, at saka, yun nga, cumulative or non-cumulative. Eh dito sir, wala naman eh. Base. Yan. Dito, wala naman kasi. Bakit natin ngayon i-assume? Remember class, the only difference between cumulative and non-cumulative as far as the reduction from the net income in computing the basic earnings per share is concerned is the declaration. Cumulative, you will deduct 1-year dividend regardless of declaration. Non-cumulative, you will deduct a 1-year dividend provided that there is a declaration of dividends. Here comes the classification, whether the preference shares are cumulative or non-cumulative would be indifferent, would not matter. Why? Because there is a declaration of dividends. Okay? Kaya talaga magbabawas ka dyan. Whether this is cumulative or non-cumulative, since there is a declaration of dividends, you will deduct 1-year dividend. Okay? So this would be 100,000 times 20 times 10%. So this is 200,000 here. Okay? Divided by the weighted average number of shares outstanding, which is 200,000 at wala namang nangyari within the year. So this remains at 200,000. Hindi naman nadagdagan eh. Wala namang naging conversion. Actual conversion. Okay? So this is 200,000. So this is 1.6 divided by 200,000. So this is 8. While for the diluted earnings per share, so this is your net income given. Wala naman convertible bonds. Kaya naman wala naman interest expense. Okay. So, yun na yan. Then we have the 200,000 here. And what is the 200,000? Ito. And this is outstanding for how many months? 12 months over 12. At sabi natin, assume conversion or exercise potentially dilutive securities. Since there is a potentially dilutive securities, when each preference share is convertible into ordinary shares. Okay? And that assumption of conversion, tulad ng sabi natin kanina, is assumed to take place when that time that this potentially dilutive securities or the convertible preference shares were issued. And this is issued when? January. Kaya ang assumption percent nangyari yun ng January. So 100,000 here times 2. So yun. Iyan yung denominator. 400,000. This is now 4.50. How about for scenario 2? That the preference shares were issued April 1. May issued yan. Date of issuance, not date of conversion. Okay. So here, your net income is 1.8 million pesos. Okay. Then still, this is your dividend, 1-year dividend, preferred dividends. Okay. So this is 100,000 times 10% times 20. So this is 200,000. So this is 1.6. And your outstanding number of shares remains at 200,000 all throughout the year. Wala namang naging actual conversion. Hindi siya nalagdagan. So that is 200,000 times 12 over 12. While for the diluted earnings per share, you have 1,800,000 here. Then this is 0 because there is no convertible bonds. Okay? However, this time, so the assumed conversion, okay, take place when the time that preference shares were issued, and that is on April 1, 2023. 2023. So this is 200,000 outstanding for 12 months over 12. And this is assumed to have been converted April 1. So this is 100,000 times 2. Okay? Each preference is convertible into 2. So 100,000 times 2 times number of months outstanding from April to December, 9 over 12. So this is 150,000. So your denominator would be 350,000. This would now be your diluted earnings per share. Okay. How about for item 3? And item 3 class. The preference shares were converted on October 1, 2023. So there was then an actual conversion. Okay. So let's have here. So ito, 1.8 million, meron dapat dito. A 1-year dividend, no, of 200,000. Yan. Okay? Then, divided by the number of preference shares, no? And weighted average number of shares outstanding yan. There was then an actual conversion on October 1. So, mag-start ka ng 200,000 dito. 200,000 times 12 over 12. Ito, nagkaroon ng actual conversion. So, this is 100,000 times 2, di ba? Times 2. 100,000 times 2. And the number of funds outstanding would be from October to December times 3 over 12. Okay? Kaya that is 50,000. Your denominator here is 250,000 number of shares. Weighted number of shares outstanding. So this is 1.6 divided by 250,000. Your BEPS is 6.4. Okay? How about here? So we have 1.8 million here. There is no convertible bond, so there is no interest expense. So your numerator would still be 1.8. Okay? Then, this is 200,000. Okay? 200,000 ito. Ayusin natin ito. So, this is 200,000. Then, the preference shares were issued when? The preference shares were issued January 1. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, class, your denominator would be, this is 200,000. Then, that is an assumed conversion. Okay, the assumed conversion took place when? Diba? January 1. Because this is the time when the preference shares were issued. Okay? Wala nga tayong pakialam sa actual conversion. Kasi ang formula nito ay assumed conversion lang. So, yung denominator parang ito. 200,000 here, 200,000 din dito. And this is what? The assumed conversion. Okay? Yan. So, your DEPS would still be 4.50. Okay? So, that is now your problem 6. Tandaan mo, assume conversion lang yan. Assume conversion or exercise of potentially dilutive securities. Then we have here, this is now an option. Okay? So, option ito. So, number of options were exercised throughout the year. The number of options were issued July 1. And the options was exercised on October 1, 2023. Okay? So it says here that on January 1, 2023, the company had 400,000 ordinary shares outstanding with 100 par. The company also had 50,000 share options, which entitled the holder to purchase one share at 150. Okay? And the fair value of the option is 10. Okay? So, ayan. So, the exercise price would be 160 because that is a fair value of 10. Okay? The average market price on ordinary share is 200. Net income was 3 million. Okay. So the first thing to do is to compute for the incremental, no? Incremental shares. Okay? So the incremental shares can be computed. The shortcut formula is this. Okay, you have the 50,000 options minus 50,000 times 160. 160 is the fair value divided by the 200, no? The market price. Okay, the exercise price is 160 and the fair value is 200. Makukuha mo incremental shares. Coming from the expanded formula, 50,000 times the exercise price of 160, which is 8 million divided by the market price of 200, that is 48,000. So 50,000 incremental shares minus 40,000, 50,000 options minus 40,000, there is a 10,000 incremental shares. Okay? So, gagamitin natin yan dito. None of the options were exercised. So, the net income here is provided. So, this is 3 million divided by the 400,000 number of shares outstanding. Sabi niya, none of the options were exercised. Okay? So, that is the first assumption. So, here, ano lang to, natayo lang to eh. Okay, ganito na yung ginagawa natin kanina. So, this is 3 million. Then, we have the 400,000. Then, assume conversion or exercise to have an incremental shares of 10. So, this is 410. So, this is 3 million. Wala namang interest expense. Di ba? Divided by 410. So, this is 7.32. Here, the options were issued July 1. Options were issued July 1. So, wala namang actual exercise eh. Kaya wala namang karagdagan yung denominator mo. So, weighted average number of shares outstanding as far as the EPS is concerned. We have 3 million net income. Wala namang preferred dividends. Okay, kaya wala ka rin naman dito. Wala namang preference shares, kaya wala kang preferred dividends. Diba? The numerator is net income minus preferred dividends divided by 400,000. Since 400,000 is outstanding for 12 months over 12, and there are no additional shares. So this is 400,000. So this is 7.5. But for here, it was issued July 1. Okay, so it is assumed then that this was converted July 1. So this is 10,000 times 6 over 12. So you have the net income here. There is no interest expense because there is no convertible bond. So your numerator would still be 3 million. And the actual number of shares outstanding is 400,000. The incremental shares is 10,000. 10,000 times 6 over 12 because this was assumed to have been converted July 1. And what we need is the weighted, no? So that is times 6 over 12. So this is 405, where the EPS is 7.41. While here, okay, ang sabi dito, the options were exercised. So, magbabago na to. Kasi the options were exercised daw eh. When? October 1. So, this is 3 million. So, this is 400,000. Weighted number of shares outstanding. So, 10,000 times 6 over diyan. Ito, 50,000 times the options were exercised, no? Times 3 over 12. This should be 10,000. 10,000 incremental shares. 400,000 tapos incremental shares dapat of 10,000 times 3 over 12. So this is 7.27. But for here, the net income is 3 million. There is no interest expense. This is 400,000. Okay? Then, wala kang pakialam sa actual exercise. Ang kailangan mo lang yung issuance. And this is assumed to have been issued when? January 1. So this is 10,000. 12 over 12. Assumed to have been exercised 12 over 12. Yan siya. So this is 10,000. Okay? Next. Ito naman. Basic loss per share. Pareho lang to. Okay? Ito net loss natin. Plus the dividends of 320,000. That is 4 million times 8%. Okay? Equivalent to 1 year. And this is the number of shares outstanding, which is 5 million divided by 20. So that is 250,000. So this is 7.32 divided by 250. The basic loss per share is 28.32. 29.28. Okay?